Hey guys, welcome to McQ BBQ. I'm McQ, and today we're doing brisket. Brisket is like the Cadillac of Well, Cadillac's not a really good analogy anymore. It's like the Tesla of barbecue. Everybody wants to eat good brisket or to barbecue good brisket. And I'm going to show you how, and it's actually really easy. The first thing we're going to do is we want to get this thing trimmed up and seasoned, and that's what I'm going to take you through right now. So when you have a whole packer brisket like this is how it came out of the packaging. Got this at Costco. It's a prime grade brisket. Where we live, it was about $3.76 a pound, which is actually a really good price for prime brisket. A lot of the local grocery stores is going to have a higher price on it for just a choice quality piece of meat. With this one, there is quite a bit of trimming we're going to need to do. All this thick fat is going to need to come off. That doesn't render when it cooks. The meat's pretty uneven, and we're going to want to even it out. So we're probably going to cut off some of this fat off the back to even that out. I also like to separate the flat section from the point before I cook it. The reason for that is I like to do the burnt ends with the point. And it's going to be a lot easier for me if I can just take this off when it hits the right temperature instead of having to take the entire brisket off, separate it, put half back on and chop the other half. This way they're split at the beginning and we can cook them separate. They cook at different paces too. And in my experience, the point's going to cook a little bit faster than the flat. So the nice thing about that is you're going to be able to be cooking your burnt ends usually while the flat is finishing off, and you'll have an appetizer for your guests or your family. So we'll go ahead and get started on trimming this guy. We're going to start with these just kind of thick, hard chunks of fat here. I like to use a boning knife. It's nice and sharp, but it gives me the dexterity I need to get around and make good cuts. Other thing is I like to wear the black nitrile gloves when I'm doing my prep work, but also if you pair these with some knit gloves after the cook, you put these on over them, it's going to give you insulation from the heat so you can handle the really high heat meat, but still have your finger movement and dexterity. So we're just going to start cutting this away. I'm going to cut away a lot of the fat here, and then I'm going to separate the flat from the point. The other thing you're going to want is a bowl of some sort to throw that fat in. This fat's going to come in handy down the road. So you're going to want to take the fat, store it. It's good if you have a food saver or some sort of vacuum sealer. Seal that up, stick it in the freezer. You can grind it with other meats later to make sausage or burgers or brisket fat. It'll add a lot of flavor to other recipes. And this part's going to run deep right here. This big, thick chunk of fat here. It's going to run all the way through the meat, so you can kind of see the way it looks here. It all connects. There's this big chunk of fat. We're going to peel up the flat. There's going to be some fat in the middle that we're going to cut out, and that's going to help us separate the point from the flat. One of the things I love about making brisket is after you've served it to the family for dinner or whatever and you save the leftovers, your family's going to be eating brisket for like a week plus. You can freeze some of it for later, make a stew. A go-to for me is I always love to make some brisket tacos. Brisket nachos always make it into the rotation. Brisket sandwiches. You could, like I said, do stew, chili. The brisket will make for a good base for that. And now you can see here, we got a lot of the fat separated from the point here. And this fat's going to go underneath here. And it's going to go pretty deep, probably back to about here. Just this layer of fat. Now, when you're looking at the flat on the brisket, your fat on the flat's going to come from the underneath side. So when you slice this and you pull it up and you look at it, you're going to have fat along the bottom. And that's where the flavor from the fat's going to come, along with all the marbling inside the meat. So you really don't need this extra fat here. It's not going to do much for you. and it's going to look a lot better if you cut it out. It's also going to make the meat more even. You can kind of see on this section of the flat right here, it's kind of bulbous. It's sticking up. It's thicker than the rest of it. And that's because of this fat. We're about to lift this up. And you can kind of see here, it's all going to connect. As you slice this through, this fat just separates. And we're going to cut that out. What you're going to be able to do now is you've got the flat. You're going to be able to pull this whole muscle up here, and you can see the point here. It's separated by this pretty much, so we can pretty much come in here now and just cut this whole section off here. We've got our point. So perfectly separated. We're going to season them separately. We're going to cook them separately. We'll just take off a little more fat. That's probably good for getting into here. We want to take some of this fat and silver skin off the top too. Some of this kind of grayer meat I'll cut off too. Also helps to make it look nice and even. Now we're starting to see a little bit more of a nice flat even surface since we've cut a lot of that extra fat out of the middle from in here, you remember? A lot of people say to leave about 1/4 inch of fat on the bottom. Ultimately, it's going to taste good either way. You don't need to have a perfect 1/4 inch. If there are thicker parts like this along the bottom, you can certainly trim that up a little bit. Remember, we're not plastic surgeons. We're doing barbecue. We don't want to cut away fat to make it look good. We want to leave fat in to make it taste good. All right, we have a pretty good even thickness here now. I'm going to go ahead and get the rubs ready and show you how to rub them. So now that we have our brisket trimmed up, we've separated the point from the flat. Really excited about this point. We're going to get some good burnt ends out of that for sure. We're going to season these now, and then we're going to wrap them in plastic wrap. Stick them back in the fridge for at least about 6 hours. You can do overnight if you want. Right now, when I'm doing this, it's about 6:30 in the evening. I'm going to leave it in the fridge wrapped like this until about 2 or 3 in the morning. And that's usually when I wake up to put the brisket on the barbecue so that it can be ready midday and I can rest it in the cooler until guests show up and start slicing. We're going to start with the flat. And we're just going to be super generous with this. And what you want to use for your rub for the brisket, I like to have something, of course, that has a lot of salt in it, but also a lot of pepper. I don't think you can have too much pepper in your rub for your brisket. It's also going to help give it that nice dark bark. Something I always, no matter what rub I'm using, I always like to follow up with a coffee-based rub. Traeger makes one, just a coffee rub. It has black pepper and coffee in it. And when you pull this thing off the smoker and you unwrap it, or you pull out of the cooler and you unwrap it, you're going to have a nice dark bark from the combination of your normal beef rub and then going over it with some coffee. So when you're seasoning your brisket, you really want to do it liberally. You're going to want to coat every piece of meat. You don't want to see any little pieces of pink peeking out from underneath. You're going to blanket this thing in your rub. More really is better when you're doing brisket. So you can see that rub going on there, nice and even. Little pieces of white too. You're going to have a little bit of fat on the top unless you're super anal about it and trim all that off. But we're going to make that disappear to the rub too. All right, and then I'm going to hit it up with a coffee rub. And I'm going to do a light coat of this because it already has a lot of seasoning on it. This is just kind of like a finishing touch. And then we're going to pat that down. Now we're going to do our fat side. I also like to, that spot that we separated the point, I like to fold that back too and throw some even more rub in the middle there. You could pick up the meat and kind of just smash the edges down onto the where you want to pick that up. We want all the meat to get the rub love. We don't want any parts of this meat getting jealous. All right, so we have these rubbed. We're gonna wrap them really tight in plastic wrap. Go around it a few times, make it airtight. We're gonna stick them back in the fridge for at least about 6 hours, overnight if you have the time. And then we'll pull them out when we're ready to smoke. After the brisket has taken a nice nap under a cozy blanket of flavor, we're going to be ready to put some smoke on it. Check out the next video to see how we do that. If you found this helpful and you're still awake, please give this video a like and subscribe to McQ BBQ.